Okay.
We can edit it out.
No, we can keep that in. John would like that.
So, socio-psychological tradition is communication as interpersonal interaction and influence. It epitomizes the objective perspective, and scholars believe that there are communication truths that can be discovered through careful and systematic observations. It focuses on what is really on what it is rather than what it ought to be.
Okay. The cybernetic tradition, communication is a system of information processing. So cybernetic tradition is about communication through relationship. It basically states that all information is related and all information affects one another. So for the example that they gave us in the book, the anti-aircraft firing system took in the results of the shots that it took, therefore calculating on that to get an accurate and successful hit. So it's basically interrelated. Communication is all interrelated, and all communication is connected.
What the rhetorical tradition is basically everything about public speaking. It's the ability of getting up in front of a crowd and using persuasion and audience adaptation to get a point or an argument across to your group or a crowd of people. Alright, so the strength of rhetorical tradition is that public speaking is obviously in general a very powerful way of communication. It's how we persuade and argue something that we feel passionate about or not, and it's the best way to reach as many people as we can with our message. Weakness about it is that public speaking is a argument and something. Sometimes people will take argument literal and just argue one-on-one person instead of trying to demonstrate what the strengths or weaknesses of the point or argument or message that they're trying to get across is.
So number 4 is semiotics, and what semiotics is, it's essentially the study of signs that have been assigned to words, or a sign that stands for something in particular. So for instance, high body temperature could be a sign of an infection, or an arrow can designate which direction to go. And those are the few examples of signs that are pretty much universal. So that could actually be one strength of semiotics, is there are some universal signs that like arrows and things of like that nature that everyone can at least understand no matter where they are on the planet. But the weakness is there are some signs that aren't universal, that people wouldn't necessarily understand if they go to a foreign land and they see some strange sign and they're not sure what it is. That could be seen as like a barrier of communication. But there are ways to get around that. It's just one of the weaknesses that come along with signs. So that's basically semiotics.
So the sociocultural tradition basically determines your communication or either affects your communication. So basically where you're from, your environment, your surroundings kind of dictate how you communicate. A strength of that would be it allows you to easily connect with those around you. It makes communication a lot easier for those around you. But with that, weakness of that, of course, would be the opposite, which was not being able to, or being more difficult to communicate with others that are in like different environments and stuff like that, or even in your own environment, not seeing things one-sided or seeing things just from the ways that you were like brought up and stuff, and not really seeing other people's cultures or identities.
So the critical tradition is basically reflecting communication and challenging unjust discourse. And so basically with that, there are a group of scholars, they're German scholars, and they're known as the Frankfurt School, and they consistently challenge 3 different features of contemporary society. It's the 3 same things that they challenge, and those are that they control the language to perpetuate power imbalances, and they also control the role of mass media in dulling sensitivity to oppression, and have blind reliance on the scientific method and uncritical acceptance of empirical findings. And so they're challenging those, and sometimes those could be based on equality or affection and communion, but sometimes those could lead to inequality or stuff like that.
So the phenomenological tradition, the word comes from phenomenology. Damn it. Phenomenology, which is a study of like one's personal experience and life through their own point of view. So the tradition, it also relates to that. So like you can't really understand someone unless you're in their shoe and you're going through what they are going through. The example here is the conversation given by 2 females. So basically, the book illustrates the example so that we can understand that you can't really see or understand a person's life and their experiences unless it's from their own given meaning and told stories. So okay. So comparing and contrasting sociocultural and phenomenological traditions, they are similar in a way that they both relate to each other because they both are based off of personal experience and knowledge.
Phenomenological deals with your own personal experiences, but with sociocultural, it deals with not only yourself, but your environment and even your whole culture.
Okay.
I can start.
Okay.
So in the book, it says that rhetorical tradition is an emphasis on the power and beauty of language to move people emotionally and steer them to action. Rhetoric is more art than science, and semiotic is the meaning of symbols, which you obviously use in order to give a speech or just to talk in general. So that's one similarity that there is about rhetorical and semiotic.
Kind of like up to their interpretation, but there are like universal or objective interpretations. But also, one difference between semiotics and rhetorical, I would say, is how rhetorical is words used primarily to persuade either an audience or an individual, whereas semiotics is just used in order to give meaning to words, or the interpretation of symbols and words. So yeah.
The similarity between critical tradition and sociocultural tradition is that they both empower something. So with sociocultural, it empowers different cultures and the languages that they use. Meanwhile, critical tradition gives empowers the theories that scholars study and try to challenge.
The differences between critical tradition and sociocultural is that with critical, it's giving power to the speaker, and then sociocultural is giving power to like the people through language.
So we don't really agree or prefer any of the traditions over another. We just kind of agree with all of them depending on what we are talking about or what we are studying. They all work and are beneficial in their own specific ways. Alright.
Question 2.
Which one are we?
Should we let John know? We came up with these in a discussion and on Monday's class period.
Yes.
So we've already discussed these.
So for objective and interpretive theories, we discussed this on Monday, and we came up with a strength and weakness for each. So for objective strength, we found that everyone can see it from one point of view since there is only one truth.
A weakness that we agreed on for the objective theory is that it's a pretty boring theory because of it being one-sided.
A strength we found for interpretive is that it can be seen from several points of view since it has multiple meanings or truths.
A weakness for interpretive is that someone's meaning and truth may contradict with someone else's meaning and truth, which happens when you're having a conversation with someone. They bring up something and you don't understand what they're saying because what they mean by one word is not what you mean.
So we all pretty much preferred the interpretive theory because there can be more communication and discussion that way. There's more for people to talk about other than there just being one objective truth. And people can help us learn and we can all grow from their own point of view.
Real quick, so basically, why is communication better than any other major?
It's very broad.
It's very broad, yes.
Very broad.
You need communication for literally anything and everything you do.
You can pretty much do anything you want with a communication degree rather than
Mm-hmm.
having a degree you can only do specific things with, such as education. You can only get jobs in the field of education or
Right.
working with children.
Mm.
And I feel like a lot of people people always ask like, oh, like what jobs can you get with the communication major? Like, why are you in this major? And I think that's because like our major isn't as like tactile as like other majors. Like a lot more majors are more like hands-on, like, you know, health. You want to be a surgeon or you want to be a lawyer or this and that. They're really like hands-on and like they're specific. But with communications, which is everywhere, like you said, not a lot of people think about that because we're not, you know, as hands-on as everybody else.
Right.
Communication is a lot more complex than people give it credit.
Yeah.
Right.
There's so many different types of communication, so it's a lot of information to take in. Obviously, it's not like if you're doing an anthropology degree and you go into something specific. This is, like we said, more broad, and it can
Right.
fit into anything.
With communication, you can really go into any field you'd like with communication. Any business that you want to work for or work with requires a communication department at least. So, you know, you have a lot of opportunities and a lot of chances with communication degree.
I feel like communications is somewhere in between almost psychology and business, to where you study interpersonal relationships, but you also study like the individual, yourself, and then also groups, other groups. And they set you up with classes like speech classes, classes along that nature that kind of give you experience talking in groups and in front of your peers, whereas other majors, I feel like it's just, like you said, hands-on destiny, and so it's kind of like a one-on-one whereas communications is more, like I said, talking with your peers and kind of doing what we're doing right now and talking through problems. And
Right, you have options if you
Yeah.
want to, like, if you want your job to communicate with other people, like face to face, you can do so. And if you
Mhm.
don't really want to communicate to people face to face, rather, you still like communicating with people, but you don't really, you get kind of shy, or you get kind of anxiety and nervous. You can still talk to people through technology, through today's technology, really.
Yeah.
So it fits your preference.
And like when we were talking about in class, when John was like, without communications, how are the doctors or technicians, how are they gonna, figure out how to like solve certain things or like do the surgery without communications?
Right.
So
Mm-hmm.
it's very important.
Communication kind of encompasses all of what we do.
Mm-hmm.
On these videos.
Phenomenological. 3, 2, 1. Phenomenological.
Phenomenological.
Mess up on purpose.
Phenomenological. Okay, so the phenomenal. Okay, alright, I'm gonna restart, okay, because I messed up. My fault. Okay.
Take 2.
Take 2, scene 2, take 2.
Wait, why am I whispering?
I got this, y'all. I don't got this.
Yeah, it's not like we got all day, sister. Let's
Okay,
go.
I'm sorry, gosh. Brother, damn. Okay.
Well, I was just thinking that sociocultural and phenomenological, they go